My name is Logan Struxmeyer.
I'm Ollie Shin.
My name is Mariana.
And I'm Aditya.
So we are going to talk about Larissa Leys and her vision of humanity. So Larissa Leys is an American-born Canadian, and she graduated in sociology and is also an LGBT and feminist activist. She is also an assistant professor of literature, of Canadian literature in British University of British Columbia, and so she wrote 2 novels, and one of those is The Selfish Girl. The Selfish Girl is a science fiction where the protagonist is Nua. Nua is a Chinese god that creates all the humanity, and this science fiction is a future post-apocalyptical that brings the aspect of travel through space and time. With this travel through space and time, Miranda, that is the Chinese god, was tired of being alone, only watching her creations. So she creates Miranda, that is actually a clone. So this makes the audience question if they are the same person or not, because they live in different ages in different countries. And this reflects the aspect of what is humanity for Leys. So with this, it's possible to analyze the themes of her writing. There brings aspects of race, culture, gender, and sexuality, because she always says that the women have to keep fighting for their rights. And as a Chinese that had suffered a lot of xenophobia in the past, she gives this sense of equality. So if they are clones, it means that they are not human. And if they are not human, they don't have to follow the rules of the society. So they have an equal worth. And this brings us for our question research, that is, how does Leys' vision of humanity defines Western dehumanization of minorities, which gives us to our thesis. That is, the vision of future expands the definition of humanization that challenge the definition of dehumanization of minorities, especially the Asian, because as I told, if they are not human, if they are clones, they live in an equal world that doesn't have to follow the rules of the society. So they don't have to suffer, and they live in an equal world.
So this just kind of brings us to some of the aspects of Chinese mythology and Chinese culture in her writing. In a lot of her works, Selfish Girl, the Automaton biographies, and others, we can see elements of feminist science fiction, social criticism, immigrant shame, and these narratives that kind of help satirize and restructure the way that we think about minority groups and oppression in our world. And this just kind of brings us to who Larissa Leys includes in her definition of humanity in her work. This includes humans, of course, also cyborgs, clones, and reincarnated gods, like Mariana said. And so one example, like she said, was Nua/Miranda. And Nua was a god who created Miranda through kind of putting her essence into a fruit and then feeding the fruit to a woman, and then the woman bore Miranda. And the kind of duality of mythological religious symbolism, both Nua being the Chinese god and the concept of immaculate conception in Christian mythology / teachings, scripture, just kind of goes to emphasize the fact that Miranda is not human. She is not like us. She's not biologically human. She is born as a human and lives as a human, but this kind of stark difference helps to emphasize Larissa Leys' point of people who aren't like us can still live like us, and people who are different still have the capability and the means to be human and to exist in society. And then on the flip side of that, we see Rachel in the Automaton biographies, which is a collection of 4 poems by Larissa Leys. The first one is entitled Rachel. And in the poem, it's kind of from the point of view of this entity who you can't really understand within the poem itself. And it basically talks about how people use her and how she's more human than human and too perfect and is looking at her creator. And externally from the poem, we know that the point of view is from Rachel, who's the main replicant in the 1982 film Blade Runner. And in the film, the whole point is determining whether or not these replicants are human or whether they deserve rights. And so flipping the perspective from the movie being a human's perspective on replicants to a replicant's perspective on humans just kind of further emphasizes the duality of perspectives and the duality of experience. Seeing that the replicants were oppressed and discriminated against and treated as lesser than just reflects back what Larissa is trying to comment about modern society and about the dehumanization of minorities.
So at this point, we've seen two things. We've seen one that the divine can live among humans in Lies world, and the other thing is that clones do live among humans. The divine part isn't all too impressive. When you think about it, who of us would complain if someone descended from the heavens and decided to live among us? On the other hand, I think there would be some more concerns voiced if members of the lowest class of society wanted to come and live, among us in particular. So it's more important to see how clones are treated, in my opinion, than how the Miranda or Nua live lives among humans. Clones are treated pretty horribly in The Saltfish Girl. Alan, in her dissertation, writes that they're treated like disposable workers, and that brings us to a comparison to today. You have large companies like Amazon, whose CEO is the richest man in the world, but the employees are on food stamps. So, you see that workers are used as a means rather than people. There are some physical differences between clones and humans that are used almost as excuses. The first is that they cannot reproduce. Therefore, they don't have the same evolutionary reason to live that we do. So that brings the question, what is humanity really? Well, on top of that, they're not born like we are. They're made with a purpose in mind. So between the fact that they don't share the same evolutionary purpose and the fact that they are born with a different purpose in mind, or made rather, there's a lot of reasons to think why they wouldn't be human. But Lai uses them almost as an extreme example to show how it is incorrect to view them as inhuman. Here again we have Rachel from the Blade Runner. Replicants in the Blade Runner are kept alive for 4 years. And the reason is because they're so human that if they're allowed to live longer, they would pass tests that would make them human. The way they differentiate between replicants and humans is a test about emotional intelligence. Now this should strike you all wrong, because if replicants are capable of developing emotions and the emotional intelligence that would classify humans versus clones, then they should be treated as humans and not as replicants. So in Blade Runner, the treatment of the replicants is meant to be appalling, to show us why the treatment is bad. Clearly replicants, like was said before, are very much human in almost every way. The only thing keeping them from humanity is humans themselves. So clones aren't unique to Lai's fiction. They're used across fiction, and one example I want to use is Star Wars. We all know the scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan are racing towards General Grievous' ship, and some clones behind Anakin and Obi-Wan's ship, like Jedi starfighters, are attacked. And Anakin says we should go back and help them, and Obi-Wan says let them do their job. Now, Obi-Wan's a pragmatic one here. We all agree that he's correct, that they shouldn't go back and save the clones. But the fact that Anakin wants to go back and save them is meant to be endearing. It's meant to show us that Anakin is more compassionate than we first believed. And the fact that it makes him look compassionate clearly means that treating the clones well is the correct thing to do. We see more examples across Star Wars. Here in the Clone Wars, when the clones say we're meant to be expendable, it's kind of heartbreaking because you know that they're not really, they're people too. And it's also meant to be endearing and show character when Plo Koon says, "Not to me, you really mean something." So we see that across science fiction, clones are used as an example of mistreated humans. And especially in Lai's work, it shows off how treating them correctly is the correct and proper thing to do, because characters who do treat clones well are seen as empathetic and compassionate.
So by this reflection with the Lay's writing, we can see a real example of the life. The store magazine Louisa has an avatar that has social medias and is the one that helps when you go to the store. And this virtual avatar was being harassed in the social media. So this brings this aspect of what is human and what is not. So if it's a technology, how it can suffer the same way as a woman would suffer in real life. So this brings the importance of Lai's writing of our life, because if this happened for a machine, imagine the reflect of this in the real life. This is really big. So she is a clone and she suffered. So this is a contrapoint, because if they are not human, how can they suffer as a human? Not suffer, but have the same consequences as a human.
All right. Continuing on, I think it's important to first analyze how Larissa Lai highlights the struggles of certain races before she actually challenges how they're portrayed. And one of the struggles that Larissa Lai touches upon in Saltfish Girl is actually a debatable question. Does the past poor treatment of a race affect subsequent generations? And arguments go back and forth about this, but Larissa Lai puts in her 2 cents by making the clones in her story actually retain past memories from previous clones, and how Melissa Fung puts it is past trauma literally remains inseparable from the present for clones, much how previous generations of certain races still have an impact on the present. Now obviously this is hyperbole, because in reality we can't have memories from a life that we didn't live, but this does shed light on the issue that although newer generations might live under newer, fairer circumstances, that doesn't negate the past discrimination against previous generations. Like for example, whether it be African Americans after the abolishment of slavery, or Japanese Americans after internment camps, the effects of those institutions do not go away as soon as they're abolished. They live on through generations and generations, kind of like a domino effect. And speaking of past poor treatment, Lai also draws a connection between how clones are treated in the Saltfish Girl to how Chinese or Asian immigrant workers were treated for many years in the United States. Chinese immigrant workers were usually seen as cheap, replaceable machines, basically, and Larissa Lai draws parallels to this and provides commentary on it by making the workers in her story literally cheap, replaceable, and machine-like clones. And connecting the clones to the workers also conveys to the reader that those above the Chinese workers did not see them as individuals, but mainly as like a clone of just one single entity, kind of like an army, I guess, not as individuals, and that further deprives them of their humanity. All right, and so far I've talked about how Larissa Lai sheds light on certain struggles that certain races have, but now I want to go into how Larissa Lai challenges the contemporary views on these people, and the first way that she does that is by making them actual characters. Around the time when Larissa Lai first started writing her stories, sci-fi mainly reserved Asian roles for the evil scientist or as part of a superpower that's trying to take over the world. But Larissa Lai does away with these tropes and instead opts to give a very human look at an Asian protagonist and respectfully integrates Asian culture into the main storyline. And I don't think I don't think any part of the Saltfish Girl exemplifies this better than the main character of Nuwa or Miranda, as Nuwa is literally a god who is directly based off of a god in actual Chinese folklore. The entire story is centered around reincarnation, and on top of that, Nuwa is an extremely complex character that we get to see through 4 different lifetimes, in 4 different forms, 2 including a fish and a snake, and in 4 different eras. So we get to learn a lot about her, how she acts in different situations and all that. We get to see her point of view. It's first person at some points in the story, and despite being a goddess, she also has human traits such as jealousy, which is why she turns into a human in the first place. She's easily manipulated, and she's lazy at times, and she also, more specifically, she has immigrant shame, which is defined as conflicting feelings about an immigrant's homeland, based in the fact that usually what makes one's homeland unique is also what leads to their discrimination or ostracization in their new world. And Larissa makes it known to the reader that this is a very prevalent thing, and that anyone can have immigrant shame by giving it to Miranda. And not only does Miranda have immigrant shame literally because she is an immigrant in her story, but she also has immigrant shame for her past lifetimes as Nuwa. And Lai's purpose in including this immigrant shame is to show how deep discrimination can go. Not only does the immigrant not feel at home in their new world, but they also have their ideas of their old world twisted and manipulated. And finally, some will argue that the clones not knowing where they were originally cloned from is robbing them of their past. Adi touched on that, but other people argue that folklore in the stories that clones tell, speculating on where they actually came from, is actually representative that no matter where they actually came from, as Melissa Fung puts it again, histories are never individual containable units of the past. Histories are entangled and collectively experienced, which basically means, in short, that histories in all cultures are not just a linear line, but they're entangled. People contribute to the history. History is not necessarily the same for everyone, but it's still everybody's history, I guess. All right, and we revisit our thesis that Larissa Lai's vision of the future expands the definition of what it means to be human by challenging Western dehumanization of minorities, especially those of Asian descent, by mainly highlighting the struggles of these races, and then challenging how they're portrayed in science fiction.
By also going back and looking at how characters who are very clearly not human can still be integrated and also have feelings and emotions in society.
And also, in the same time, if they are not human, they don't have to follow the rules of the humanity, what makes them different in some aspects. But this brings again this vision of an equal world to bring for those characters that are minorities of the society, strong personalities and strong characters, which is really important in our world nowadays.
And we also see this by using the clones as an example of how mistreatment of minorities is incorrect.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
so much.